Our team in Reykjavik included researchers from all over the world.
Well, I told Haukar, and I think he agreed. It's the most beautiful manuscript I've ever seen.
This manuscript is, pardon the pun, the smoking gun.
The recreation of a working prototype of the world's earliest firearm by Ian McCollum is the most impressive feat of experimental archaeology of my lifetime.
This recent discovery turns everything we thought we knew about the past on its head.
In the medieval Icelandic saga, Friðrik the Four-Fingered, a young man of poor upbringing attains new respect in his society by becoming a master weaponsmith. In particular, it is said he is the master builder of the mysterious, powerful weapon known as the Atgeir, a weapon frequently mentioned in the Icelandic sagas, but never described. In 2022, 3 scholars from different fields, historical weapons expert Ian McCollum, Viking combat specialist Rainer A. Oscarsson, and Old Norse linguist Dr. Jackson Crawford, met at the University of Iceland's Arne Magnusson Institute to dive into the medieval archives there to see if they can find any missing information. Now, while perusing the archive's manuscripts with Professor Haukar Thorgerson, Crawford came across a leaf from an earlier 13th century manuscript, which was being used as a binding on a later manuscript. But this was no ordinary scrap of vellum. What Crawford had discovered was a leaf from a book obviously intended for the education of a young nobleman, and on one side was printed a description of that weapon known as the Atgeir.
The part of the text in the missing leaf that interests us here goes as follows. Atgeirin. Það Atgeir kallaður, maður hefur í hund og setur eld inn í. Og hver sakkar náttúru dufts þess inn í og kallað Surtr-duft, spyr Atgeirin loga mannhættan mjólk og langrekkandi. It is called an Atgeir, which a man holds in his hand and places fire into. And because of the nature of the dust within it, which is called Surtr's dust, the Atgeir spits a flame very dangerous to man and very long-reaching. So was the Atgeir really an early firearm?
I'm a professional student of what I will coin as combat pathology. I started this career path as a student in anthropology at the University of Colorado in Boulder. My mentor professor was the department chair, Dr. David Green. He introduced me to the archaeological evidence of combat trauma in antiquity. I'm in my 40th year of active duty law enforcement in the state of Colorado. In this career, I have investigated literally hundreds of gunshot wounds, both fatal and non-fatal. In the summer of 1999, I was fortunate enough to be brought by the Norwegian government to the Oslo Police Academy. I was introduced at that time to a military forensic pathologist. He told me that he exhumed several bodies from the Viking era that exhibited the pathology of gunshot wounds. It was mystifying to both of us as far as we knew, firearms did not exist in Northern Europe at that time.
Independent carbon dating of the remains from Svíabar performed at our lab confirmed that the individual died approximately 1030 AD, plus or minus 20 years.
The femur showed signs of being set or otherwise tended to, and some healing had occurred around the gunshot wound prior to the individual's death. Taken together, we now believe it's likely that the individual survived the initial trauma, only to die of infection within a matter of weeks later.
I thought that it might be good to see if there was a cognate in Old English, and in fact there is a cognate Atgar, which pops up in the Battle of Maldon, which is a very famous text from the 10th century. And it's only in one line, which is Thar stod alvere, Atgare Jedalvode, which means there stood, or then stood Alvere, deafened by an Atgar, or Atgar deafened. And although, we can't jump to any conclusions about this, it does feel a little bit like a puzzle piece sort of falling into place.
Friðrik saga ferfingraða
classic outlaw saga, you know, one of the best loved sagas. And we've never really understood exactly what happened, how Frederick lost one of his fingers. And, you know, now this just makes so much more sense. And it's just amazing that, like, no one figured this out before, but obviously it makes so much sense that, like, once the Vikings got to Iceland and there's all this sulfur, and, you know, anyone who's ever been to Iceland obviously has smelled the hot water and the sulfur in there. And yeah, it's just like, it's kind of a no-brainer when you think about it, but we just didn't put two and two together, I guess.
We already knew that the atgeir was some kind of very special weapon based just on who uses it. The most famous man to bear an atgeir is Gunnar of Hlíðarendi in the saga of Burnt Njáll, or Njáls saga, one of the greatest and most celebrated of the Icelandic sagas. Gunnar has a particular singing atgeir, and the singing is represented as something magical in the saga. To read from my forthcoming translation of the saga of Burnt Njáll. Hallgrímur had an atgeir which he had ordered enchanted with dark magic, so that no weapon could kill him except for it. The enchantment also caused men to know right away when the weapon was used to kill someone, because the weapon would sing before it killed, so that it was heard far away. This was the great magic in the weapon. But it was always unclear why exactly the weapon should sing. It didn't seem to have a personality.
Well, this startling new discovery has a lot of implications for Old Norse studies. For example, Gunnar of Hlíðarendi, the protagonist of Njáls saga, I've never really understood why he manages to kill all these people. But of course it makes more sense if the atgeir is a machine that uses gunpowder. And in a way it also helps us to understand his friendship with Njáll, who is a sage. It would make sense for a hero to have a firm alliance with an inventor, a scientist, who is viewed as a magician in the Middle Ages, because he understands gunpowder.
This sort of quote from Guðrúnarkvöld is very, very interesting, because this is obviously a poem that we have in the Codex Regius of the Eddic poetry. And in that, that's actually from around the same time, and maybe slightly later, that manuscript. And this text here that we've got a fragment of now cites this poem, but it's a slightly modified version. And I mean, that's very typical for Eddic poetry, that there's slight verbal differences, of course.
Let's see what it can tell us. Let's see what this document says to us. Well, to begin with, we can see that the letter forms on this vellum leaf are Carolingian insular of the typical Icelandic style for the 13th century. That's one. The hand is clean and neat, and the text is completely and miraculously legible. We see the A with the open second story, the insular F, the closed G. Now, all of this information together suggests a date between 1225 and 1300. But now we add the unvoiced at in the past participle kalat, and that to me suggests the very earliest part of that period.
I mean, just looking at it, it's obviously, you know, mid 13th century Icelandic, like maybe even the northwest of Iceland. There's some flourishes on the big thorn here that might come from a particular scriptorium that might have been in the northwest of Iceland, I think, and reminiscent of some other famous manuscripts from the period, such as Codex Regius of Grágás, the Konungsbók. And then I think it's really interesting that I think the scribe might not quite have understood everything he was writing, because there's a small scribal error here in where they're talking about the way that the Atgeir was carried, and it says stort járn að mjálmar beininu, but they made a little bit of an error in the minims in beininu, and they've written beinu, and so they might just have had a slight lapse in their concentration, but they might also have been a little bit perplexed by what was going on here. And so these Atgeir weapons or blunderbuss, they might have become obsolete by the time this was written. Obviously, in the Viking Age, they had a lot of things that then were kind of phased out by the time this was written in the 13th century.
And I've been just astonished to see the results of Ian McCollum's recreation of the weapon.
This changes everything.
This new discovery changes everything. We're going to have to start throwing these out and just start all over again from scratch.
While the scholarly and historic implications of this find have been incredible, I would be remiss not to mention the effect it's had on the university as well. Due to the increased interest because of the find, we've had a huge influx of students to our Scandinavian classes. Our hardworking lecturers and non-specialist TAs have never had more work to do. In fact, it's been such a financial windfall for our department, we've added not one, but two new full-time German tenure track positions.